John Lynch says, we have a plan. Let me pop that up for you right here. We have a plan, is what he says. The plan is to replenish the core in April. Quote, this was at Stanford's Pro Day, by the way. We got this thing called the draft, and we got a lot of picks. And I think the thing that fans should know is we have a plan, and we're going to execute that plan, and we're excited about that opportunity. Niners have 11 picks. So we got a thing called the draft. That's the plan. All right, the plan is the draft, and I'm fine with it. I get it, and we've been saying this for days. It's not like this is a secret, this whole, hey, let me tell you a secret. What? We got a plan. What is it? The draft. Like, it's pretty obvious at this point. You're not signing free agents unless they're a special teamer, right? So unless you're a special teamer, we want nothing to do with you. I showed you the chart of remaining places, and as I often say in my favorite analogy, because I've been there, in fact, I was the king of this, oh my God, the lights are coming on at 2 a.m. and I don't have a date. And everyone's scurrying, right? Well, that's what the Niners, there's guys left who could absolutely contribute to this football team. 𝐿YNCH being one is still out there. Defensive line, you need some help. You can't rely on all rookies. There's a few guys out there. Yesterday I talked about CJ Mosley, if he's healthy. Could be a guy who could be a stopgap kind of a player. Maybe the Niners just aren't interested in that in any way, shape, or form. Maybe after the draft, when guys get released, that's another way to pipeline your team. Maybe that's going to be a way that the Niners do it. But clearly, with 11 picks, John Lynch and the rest of the 49ers brain trust believe that the draft is the way to go. We know, and I'll just reiterate for you, edge rusher, defensive line in general is depleted. Replace Dre Greenlaw. Be nice to have another corner. I know they got Trey Brown from the Seahawks. He is off injured. Free safety would be nice. I'd rather have it be a veteran. Offensive line, I really think they're going to go right tackle, move McKivitz to left guard. I've told you that a million times. Probably need some depth at running back. I don't know what's going to happen with �ayuk, I'll tell you that, but they could add wide receiver to the core. Luke Farrell, who they brought in, is more of a blocker to replace Juice, but then they got such bad backlash that they brought Juice back. But he's a blocker, so they still need that receiving tight end for George Kittle when he's out of the games. Here's what you're asking yourself right now, because this is what I asked myself. All right, Lund, how realistic is it that the plan of the draft will work? Glad you asked, because I went down a rabbit hole today. The draft is the plan. All right. The Niners had a lot of good drafts through the years. Give them credit. Keeping in mind that I said every position group outside of, let's see, I said, okay, not quarterback because they're going to re-sign Brock. And they have Mac Jones as the backup, whatever you think of that. They're set at quarterback. Not set at running back, need depth. Not set at receiver, even with �ayuk, need depth. Not set at tight end, need a second tight end. Not set on the offensive line, certainly not set on the defensive line. Need a linebacker, could use a safety in a corner. I think I mentioned every position group but quarterback. Offensive and defensive lines, I think, would take precedence over anything. So how realistic is John Lynch's plan of the draft? So this is largely considered, I think, the best draft in the history of the 49ers. And it just so happens, remember, the Niners have 11 picks, right? Well, there's 13 picks there. The Niners could trade around and get 13 picks. As you see that number 8 up there, and that's considered the best draft, and there's a lot of them. I'm going to kick some of them up here for you. But in terms of quality and quantity, which is what the 49ers need, this is the best draft they've ever had. There's a lot of guys who played a lot of games on this team. If you look at Larry Roberts, 89 games, 131 for Rathman, 170 McKyer, 121 John Taylor. Haley, we know. 170 Steve Wallace. Was he a superstar? No. Kevin Fagan. Was he a superstar? No. But you've got to have both. Don Griffin, a starting corner, 161. These guys played a lot of games. So they need solid players. It'd be nice to mix in a Charles Haley Hall of Famer. But John Taylor was opposite Jerry Rice. Pretty good. Tim McKyer and Don Griffin, starting corners. Tom Rathman, when fullbacks were a big deal, blocking, catching the football, all-around fullback. Steve Wallace, a starting tackle for many years. Kevin Fagan, a rotational defensive lineman. That's a massive, massive home run draft. And the 49ers need that kind of a draft. So if your plan is draft, and John Lynch just said to the gathering media yesterday, draft is our plan. Well, this is the kind of draft you'd have to have. If this is the only thing, okay, we're relying on the draft. How realistic is it that the Niners hit? There's 8 guys there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 starters there. A Hall of Famer, a Hall of really good in John Taylor and Tom Rathman and Tim McKyer, and Steve Wallace was really good. He had the double helmet before it was even cool. You want to look at some other ones? Glad you asked. 81, great draft. Great draft. Helped them win a Super Bowl. But there was one position that they needed in particular, and of course, that's the secondary. Ronnie Lott, 6th overall, nailed it, Hall of Famer. And then you go Eric Wright, Carlton Williamson, Dwight Hicks and the Hot Licks, they win a Super Bowl. But it's one position. Pete Kugler, pretty good outside of that. So they hit, what, 4 guys? Like 4 really good ones, but one position group. That wouldn't be good enough. As crazy as that sounds, that'd be a really good draft, right? Really good draft, but they need more than that, as crazy as that sounds. Hall of Famer, Eric Wright, great corner. Everybody forgets in the Dwight Clark catch game, if Eric Wright doesn't make that tackle on Drew Pearson, no, sorry. Great catch by Dwight Clark, not going to the Super Bowl. So vastly underrated was Eric Wright, and that's a great draft, but it's not good enough. Let's go to another really good draft. 91, really good draft, right? Ted Washington is your first-round pick. Run stuffer. They need that kind of a guy. Maybe that's Kenneth Grant. Ricky Waters in the second round. Are you kidding me? Merton Hanks is in that draft. I mean, that's a really, like, if you hit that draft, like if that was the draft that they hit, where you're talking about a guy like Waters and Ted Washington and Merton Hanks, that's a pretty good draft. 3 guys in that draft. That's not good enough. Go to the 94 draft. I told you I went down a rabbit hole. Don't stop me now. This is a really good draft. Bryant Young goes to the Hall of Fame, 7th overall. William Floyd, Kevin Mitchell, solid linebacker, right? You got Doug Bryant, a kicker. I don't love drifting kickers. But, he was a solid kicker. And then Lee Woodall at the end, solid linebacker. That's a good draft. You got a Hall of Famer at the top. That's a really good draft. 5 guys. No, not the food. 5 guys. Good burger. Like when they put jalapenos on it, the fries are addicting. They put so much salt on it, though, you would die. But they put those fries in a cup. But anyway, you nailed 5 there. That's a really good draft. Not good enough for this one. And then let me just hit this up, not because it's a great draft, but this is, okay, so they have 11 picks. In the 2005 draft, and this is not meant to rip Alex Smith, but they have exactly 11 picks there. You see that? See the 11 picks they get? And again, it's a good draft because Alex Smith was solid. He wasn't Aaron Rodgers. I get it, but solid. Frank Gore's going to the Hall of Fame. Adam Snyder was here for a lot of years. After that, not so much. That's not a terrible draft. That's when they had 11 picks. They have 11 picks this year. John and Kyle have had some pretty good drafts, right? So I'm only putting these up because I'm thinking to myself, how realistic is John Lynch's plan? If you just joined us, John Lynch said yesterday to the gathered media at Stanford's Pro Day, we have a plan. It's called the draft. Don't tell anybody. Okay, he didn't say don't tell anybody. But that's their plan, to replenish this team through the draft. So this is their first year. I know they could have had Patrick Mahomes. They didn't. Solomon Thomas didn't work. Reuben Foster, they traded back into the first round, didn't work. Ahkello Witherspoon's actually had a solid career, just not with the Niners. C.J. Beathard, we all said this is time. What are you doing? Not so much. Joe Williams, terrible. And that was that whole story about he had problems at Utah, but they liked him so much. So bomb, bombity bomb. And then you get down to George Kittle, awesome. Trent Taylor, not terrible. DJ Jones, pretty good. Adrian Colbert made the team for a year. So you can't call that a failed draft because you got George Kittle and DJ Jones out of it, but the beginning could have been a lot better. So we're going to compare apples to apples. That's a Lynch, Shanahan, and company draft. Wouldn't be good enough. Even with Kittle, even with DJ Jones, that draft would not be good enough to make John Lynch's we've got a plan, it's the draft work. 2018, McGlinchey. I can't call McGlinchey a success because he never made it to a second contract with the 49ers. The minimum a player needs to do, draft, develop, resign, draft, develop, resign. You have to resign said player, and the 49ers didn't. So McGlinchey, to me, that's not a successful pick. Dante Pettis, complete bomb, but then you get Fred Warner, who's going to the Hall. Tavarius Moore, who was around for a little bit. Kentavious Street was around for a little bit. DJ Reed, you'd love to have that cut back. He's now with Detroit, was with the Jets. Marcel Harris was around for a while. Remember, they made him into a linebacker. Julian Taylor was around for a couple of years. Richie James, his biggest claim to fame is we were at the Super Bowl in Arizona a couple of years ago, and we had him on, and he did a backflip. Just stood there and goes, watch this, and goes, does this backflip when he was on the Giants. That was pretty cool. But that doesn't make him a better player. So, McGlinchey's solid, didn't sign him to a second contract. Fred Warner's going to the Hall of Fame. That's a pretty good draft, right? Would not be good enough to make the plan work. The plan is the draft. 2019 comes along. Bosa, of course. So Nick Bosa, and as obvious as it is, I don't care. Teams blow obvious picks all the time. When I hear people go, well, obvious, take Nick Bosa number 2. Some teams screw up stuff all the time. So Nick Bosa goes 2. Debo goes 1. Debo goes 2. Hurd with the injuries. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢, whether you like taking a punter in the 4th, I do not. He's been solid. Dre Greenlaw, you can start crying now. Caden Smith, they cut and got picked up by the Giants that year. So as great as this draft is that we're staring at right now, unless you're watching on the podcast, Bosa, Samuel, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢, Greenlaw. That's a good draft. That's a really good draft. Bosa's a Hall of Fame type of player. Debo's solid for this organization. Dre Greenlaw, really, really good. That's a great, great, great draft. What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4 hits? 4. That's not enough. You have every other position but quarterback. So the 19 draft, that's not good enough. Don't even start it here. Kinlaw, complete bomb. Ayuk, we'll see. McKivitz, not bad. Warner was around a long time. Jennings, not bad. You got 2 first-round picks here and 5 total picks. This isn't good enough. Kinlaw was a rotational piece at best. Okay, at least he would fill a hole. Ayuk, McKivitz has been, whether you like him or not, he's been a starter. I would take that right now because they need to fill positions. They need bodies on this team. Warner was a blocking 3rd tight end, and John Jennings has turned into a pretty good player. So that's, especially given that they only had 5 picks. Ambry Thomas, shut your mouth. Jalen Moore, successful. Lenore, successful. Hufanga, successful. Elijah Mitchell, successful. So your last 4 picks, Moore, Lenore, Hufanga, Mitchell, ding, 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 nailed them. Wouldn't be good enough. Those are great picks. Wouldn't be good enough. No, 22 is brutal, except for Purdy. Purdy's the only one. Drake Jackson, bomb. The first 3 picks are bombs. Burford's been underwhelming. Womack flashed. 𝐬𝐽 is still here. Kalia Davis is here. Is nothing. Castrofield's never even made it out of camp. And then there's Purdy. Clearly not good enough. 23, same thing. Didn't have a first-round pick because of the Trey Lance trade. I'm not big on J.R. Brown. Moody don't get us started. Latu's gone. Luter Jr. is hurt a lot. Beal's done nothing. Winters hasn't shown enough. Willis hasn't shown enough. Bell, please. Jalen Graham is still hanging around. That's not awful. I mean, there's some guys who are kind of like, fringy. And then, of course, last year, and before we even look at this thing, I would take last year's draft this year in terms of the impact level. Now, Pearsall, I think, is going to be better. Green's going to be a starter. Pooney's a starter and above average. Mustafa's going to be a starter. Garendo looks like the number 2 back with a guy coming back from an Achilles. 𝐾𝐿ing is special teams only. No. So you still had in last year's draft 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players, 5 plus Pearsall. We don't know yet, but I'll even count him. I mean, that's 5 or 6 players. So they need that kind of a draft, but even better than last year's draft. So that's what we have. So in a roundabout way, and I understand I just did this in a roundabout way, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, as we well know, but I just kind of wanted to reiterate it, have had a certain level of success in the draft. And certainly after the first round, none of their drafts, as good as maybe 1 or 2 may have been, would suffice when you have as many needs as the 49ers do, and they really need quantity over quality. I would take 7 or 8 solid players over 3 great players right now because they have that many needs on this football team, and that's their plan. And that's where I'm scratching my head. And I even went through the history of the best drafts of all time. And the best draft of all time for the 49ers, 86, this would be what they would have to hit to make John Lynch's plan of, our plan is the draft. I don't know why I'm whispering that. It's so dumb. But anyway, Roberts, Rathman, McKyer, Taylor, Haley, Wallace, Fagan, Don Griffin. And I'm not outside of Haley, and well, I'd say Taylor too, and Rathman. And I'm not talking like, wow, right? But just there's a lot of solid players in that draft that contributed to winning a championship there. Really an amazing draft right there. And that's the kind of draft they would need for his plan of the draft to work, in my mind. That's the one. And that's the greatest one they've had in their history. And John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have hit on, 3, 4 guys, certainly in the mid-round, but that is going to make the plan tough. We've got this thing called the draft, and we've got a lot of picks. And I think the fans should know is we have a plan, and we're going to execute that plan, and we're excited about this opportunity. 11 picks in the draft. Clearly, that's the plan. They're putting all the eggs in the basket of the draft. And they're not even, it doesn't look like, unless I'm missing something today, it doesn't look like 𝐼𝐸𝐫𝐸 would make a hell of a lot of sense, can play inside, outside. Chris Kuceric knows him. Maybe they have contacted 𝐼𝐸𝐫𝐸 and he doesn't want to come back, or he's waiting for a better deal, or maybe somebody gets hurt or whatever. At this point of free agency, kind of what's the point? He'll get a deal. You know, a guy like C.J. Mosley, I know he's banged up, but there's a connection there with Robert Saleh. You need some kind of insurance. I know that the Devontae Campbell thing didn't work out. Eric Kendricks almost signed with the Niners is out there. Safety-wise, a guy like Julian Blackmon, it makes sense. They did talk to him last year. Had a good season with the Colts last year. They need to add a couple of those guys for insurance purposes so they're not absolutely, positively desperate come draft time. And we have to go, because what that does is when you go into the draft and you're desperate, that's when 𝐬𝐻𝐫𝐞𝐿 happens. Because you're like, oh, my God, we need a defensive tackle. We don't have a defensive tackle. What are we going to do? Oh, we got to take 𝐾INLAW. No. Tristan Wirfs is there. He's going to be really good. Nope, not Tristan Wirfs. There's no way in hell that the 49ers had 𝐬𝐻𝐫𝐞𝐿 ahead of Tristan Wirfs in the draft. Even though they were at 13, they traded with Tampa. Tampa took Wirfs at 13. Niners took 𝐾INLAW at 14. There's no way the Niners didn't think Tristan Wirfs was better. There's just no way. 𝐾INLAW was unproven, had an up-and-down career, had one dominant year at South Carolina. Tristan Wirfs had been in the spotlight for a long time, really, really good player. There's no way, but they were desperate going into the draft. That's what it is. They're desperate. It's like going shopping while you're hungry. And you walk out of there and you have ding-dongs and Twinkies and junk upon junk and Lucky Charms. And it's like, they always tell you, don't go to the grocery store hungry. Certainly don't go stoned and hungry. That's because that's what I just described as stoned and hungry. But you don't want to go to the grocery store hungry because you're just like, whoa. And you always make all these bad decisions. That's the draft when you're desperate for a position. Like right now, they are desperate for defensive linemen. Desperate. So that's when you make a dumb decision and you go, wait a minute, there was 24 guys that were given starter grades by Daniel Jeremiah. You can wait on defensive linemen, but you got to get multiple defensive linemen. And as I just pointed out from the 86 draft, you don't have to get the superstar guys. Just get you've got a 𝐼𝐸𝐫𝐸 mixed in there, but you're getting a bunch of solid guys. You know, Rathman, solid. McKyer, solid. Taylor, really, really good. Wallace, solid. Fagan, solid. Griffin, solid. These guys were members of championship teams that started or played big roles. So if you could throw on obviously a Hall of Famer, but if you throw on a Haley and then a bunch of solid guys on top of that, now you're cooking with gas. We have a plan. What do you think of we have a plan? What do you think of John Lynch's plan? What do you think of the plan I've just showed you? You'd have to have the best draft in the history of the 49ers, which I believe is 86.